Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome back to Eldridge & Company and to our continuing conversation with Vincent Montalbano, a longtime practitioner of union and government politics and contributing columnist to the Civil Service Chief Leader. We've been talking about the current state of the country's political parties and our electoral system, and we're not really too satisfied with it. Is that right?
Oh, I'd say. I'd say that's right, yep.
So we've pretty much, I mean, we've covered a lot of what we think about the party. One of the problems with the party is that historically, you go back to Roosevelt, one of the major movers was the labor component, the unions. They were exceedingly strong supporters of Roosevelt. And as a result, they got great legislation. I mean, not as a result, but together. We got Social Security, all that kind of, right? So what happened to that group of people? They're not as strong as they used to be, the labor movement? No,
they're not as strong as they used to be. You know, I mean, it was a very slow, ongoing process, starting probably in the latter part of the 50s, accelerating in the 60s, and almost completing itself in the 70s, to the point where now only...
Why did that happen?
Well, I think it happened because the governments subsequent to the Roosevelt administration were not necessarily aware, cognizant, alert to the fact that they needed to constantly protect the union's ability to organize. I know that a lot of what the conservatives would say is, well, the unions did it to themselves. They were corrupt. They were this or that. They made us non-competitive. You know, there was corruption in any institution, and certainly the labor movement has had its share of it.
Who were the major leaders in that time? Was it partly Hoffa?
Hoffa was certainly a major labor leader.
Who was the...
George Meany was the head of the AFL-CIO.
Who was the...
Walter Reuther at the UAW.
Right. Who was the labor union of the mine workers? He was a colorful...
Yeah, I'm going to blank.
Big strikes,
yep,
right?
Yep.
They were persons that everybody knew.
Yes, indeed, they were.
And some of them got into trouble.
And, well, some of them got into trouble, yes. But that is not a reason to say we don't want to have unions. It's not a reason to not give workers the opportunity to organize if they want to do that. The other part of it is that the corporate system changed in America. It used to be that corporations kind of existed to produce a product or a service. They were attached to that. They wanted to have their workers stay with them. Many of them were unionized and had no problems with their relationships with unions. But, you know, we started to move in the 70s, and especially after Ronald Reagan in the 80s, to a shareholder economy. Everybody can have a piece of the economic system, of the capitalist system. And when we started doing that, and globalization came at the same time, then corporate America really did not want to have anything to do with who was working for them.
We're talking about the bottom line now.
We're talking about the bottom line, where we lost jobs to other countries, where you know, pay did not match.
And no worker ownership.
Worker ownership. No, worker ownership is a very small part of what happens in America. What we had was a system under Republican government, because remember 1968, Richard Nixon was elected. The conservative movement really gained strength, and the Department of Labor and the National Labor Relations Board began to lose their power to be able to help workers organize. So organizing is the most important thing, both external, being able to organize a shop, but also internal. And that's where I have right now my biggest complaint with the labor movement, is that their members, as we said in another program, when 40% of their members are voting for the Republican presidential candidate, or more than 40%, it means that they are not understanding what their union means to them. And that's an internal thing. that's internal communications, that's making sure that people feel empowered within their union. It is organizing them, and it is a day-to-day, everyday thing. When I was the political director at DC 37 in the 1980s, we would have a political action committee meeting every month, and there'd be 75, 100, 150 people there. We got thousands of people out on the street. It doesn't happen consistently to that extent anymore. There are some unions that do it and do it better and do it well, but it's not the way it should be. And members are not necessarily making the connection between why belonging to the union is important for the benefits they enjoy, pension, health care, etc. Now, just now, the defeat of the Constitutional Convention was actually a big victory for that kind of organizing. Because and I know we disagree
well, I think
on whether that should have happened.
I think it involved the whole electorate into the union's interest.
All I'm saying is that it allowed the unions to tell their members what they thought was important, and the members listened.
Was it members? I don't think it was just members. It was everybody, because
well,
they were able to finance a very good advertising campaign.
They did, but the members came out as well. So, but we won't talk about the case.
Yeah, right. You just muddied it up.
Sorry. Okay.
Is it also because management began to offer competing things to some of these workers?
I would say to a degree that's the case, but that is controlled by management. And again, if a union is not going to consistently educate their members as to why they still need an organization, and along comes management and says, I'll give you this, I'll give you that, I'll give you the other thing, and they don't vote for the union, or they vote the union out and they take that, they are exposing
But they have to be able to offer something to them.
Who does?
The unions, to show the members that it's worth it to belong to the union.
Union members are among the only workers these days that have pensions.
And it would,
union members have health care.
Right. The health care, I was going to say, seems to become increasingly more important.
Yes.
And that should be a tool for organizing.
Yes, those should all be tools for organizing, both internally and externally. Externally, however, the problem is that the National Labor Relations Board, it got better under Obama, but you know, we're in a different place now.
Sliding down.
It'll begin to slide back down again. Unfortunately, however, in the first year of the Obama administration, when we controlled the Congress as well, the Democrats controlled the Congress as well, they did not pass a piece of legislation whose shorthand is called card check. And all that means is that if a union is trying to organize a shop and they collect a majority of signed cards that say they want the union, then the union is allowed to come in.
And that's because they can sign the card
in
private, yes. Right? And they're not subject to the outside
intimidation
pressure
of management.
Right.
Now that's critical, because since that point, which is 2009, we've lost even more.
We had a big thing of that in the city with restaurant associates at the Met.
Okay.
If you remember, the restaurant workers union wanted a card check, and restaurant associates really opposed it.
Uh-huh. Well, that's why it needed legislation. But those are the types of things, just to circle back to the main point here. The main point is that Democratic Party should be a party that represents the interests of workers. Labor unions are institutions that represent the interests of workers. Both of them have got to organize better and work better together to choose quality candidates and have a message that people can latch on to.
But it's in a way the same, you know, there are so many things. We also have this, we need to define things, the working class, the middle class. I always thought working class were middle class.
Working class became middle class because of all the advances that the unions
all right,
brought to.
So now all of a sudden we have this distinction. What is the middle class? It's an interesting question. It's all everybody talks about is the middle class. I grew up, I think I'm the middle class.
You are the middle class.
Yeah, right. But
yeah. Especially in this day and age, you're the middle class, because the wealthy are much wealthier than
exactly.
the middle class.
There's so many people who are so wealthy that
well, there's not a lot of them, but there's
they
a lot
own
more of
so
us.
much.
Yes.
What's the figure now? That 80 of them
Eight
Eight.
billionaires have as much wealth as the bottom half of the world's population.
Combined. Yeah, right. But isn't that true? We talk about working class, we talk about middle class, the working poor, the poor. We don't even talk about the poor anymore. That's off the agenda, it seems to me.
Yeah. You know,
they're just a problem now. Homeless is just a problem.
What I'm trying to do is talk about the thing that unites everybody, whether it's the poor, the working class, middle class, and even people in the upper middle class. The thing that joins everybody together, the best identity to advocate for, is work and workers. All right, and work needs to be protected. We are, Ronnie. We have
so much work now, though.
We have so much work.
Well, the kind of work, the percentage of the work we have now,
right,
is increasingly becoming more individualistic because companies are hiring individual contractors.
Yes.
And that's also harmful to a general feeling of common protection or something.
It is, and there have been discussions inside the labor movement, and they need to go faster and more comprehensively about having a different kind of organizing. In other words, not the traditional way where you organize a shop, but if there are these gig workers, as you're calling them,
they have to be
freelance
protected
workers,
also.
yes, if they want to join the AFL-CIO as a membership organization, or one of the, and are assigned to a subunion, you know, they would pay their dues, but they would get something different.
There was a young woman in New York who
Freelancers Union.
Yeah.
Yes.
And are they affiliated with a major union?
No, they're not part of the AFL-CIO.
Why?
I don't know. I think people who are freelancers or gig workers up until this point have seen themselves not as those kinds of workers, you know, workers that unions organize. I think now that they're having some problems with their managers and the owners of the places they work are looking at it. And so there has to be, and there is. I mean, there's hope everywhere. There's hope everywhere. I get dark sometimes, but there's hope everywhere. It's in little pieces, and we need to join them together and get.
We need some creative leadership and thinking.
Yes, we do.
We need to change models. We are no longer the same world.
That's correct.
I mean, we were no longer the same world that I grew up in before. Now we're no longer in the world that I've been living in recently. We got to go to a new world, right?
Well, we have to go to a new. We have to be prepared for the new world.
We've seen that. I mean, I don't understand why the politicians are slow to recognize that people want something different from them than they've been getting.
Yeah, well, my answer to that, unfortunately, is that they fail to recognize it because they interact with the people who contribute to them, who are in powerful positions, and that's a very small universe. So while they are not completely unaware of the larger universe, their universe is small, and they participate in that, and so they're not getting the types of ideas we haven't talked about, and it goes way beyond any time we have here. But you know, I have written, but I'm not the only one who's written it. I've gotten it from other places, and it's more and more being written about of the real threat of automation to jobs in the now and in the future. You know, McKinsey and Company, which is a very, very respected survey company, says that 45% of current jobs are automatable. Current jobs. Now, there are jobs that are being created that are not jobs for people, but for machines. So, you know, it's going to continue. And we're not anywhere near trying to figure out how to address that. And there's been people like Larry Summers have talked about it. The European central bankers have talked about it. It's, you know, it's not
such a crazy thing but it's so complicated, it's overwhelming. I mean, here we have all these people who are homeless. Why don't we divert some of our attention when we don't have to work so much in a factory, or we're just overlooking the machines, to, as you said, narrowing the range of work to 3 days a week or something. And the other 2 days a week are contributing to something that isn't taken care of by our current.
Yeah, I mean, homeless. Yes, I do.
Education systems are terrible. I mean, it's so. And then if you build too much, then you're polluting more air and making, you know, warming even more dire, right?
Depending on how you build it.
Well, you just, but you look and see what's happening in land around the world with the overdevelopment. Anyway, let's go. I want to talk about, we can talk about this forever. I mean, we could have a daytime economy and a nighttime economy. We could do all kinds of things, but we don't do them. But
right.
What role does the candidate play in an election? The independent candidate, the qualities that make that candidate, which then, of course, you're saying have to emanate basically for the parties supporting the candidate. Mm-hmm. But let's look at Robert Kennedy, for instance. You know, Chris Matthews has written this book, and he's so energetic that we're talking about Robert Kennedy more than ever these days. But the quality he had, now he was wealthy, brought up with great wealth, never had a concern about anything, but he had overwhelming empathy.
He did.
Did Hillary Clinton have any empathy?
Oh, I don't really like to make personal judgments on anyone.
Well,
I would
you
say,
do as a voter.
I would say that it was not clear to the voters that she was empathizing with all of them. She didn't project empathy. If you're asking me, did she have it? I don't know.
Oh, all right, project empathy.
Did she project it? No, she did not project it.
All right. So what candidate have we had that has projected empathy recently?
Oh, recently?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in terms of the presidential election, I thought Bernie Sanders did that very well, as a matter of fact. People may disagree with me. I thought
I don't think he was empathetic, personally empathetic, because he was known basically for not really relating. I mean, that was the phenomenon, I thought, that he was a magnet.
Yeah, but, well,
he was attacking the system.
That's true, but he was attacking the system on behalf of people who are not empowered, and so
but
that's...
How did 52, well, what was the percentage of union people who voted against him? Did we ever investigate that?
In the primaries, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
be
have
interesting.
That. I don't have that figure. But you know, but Joe Biden is an empathetic
yes,
figure.
Definitely.
I think you know, Chris Murphy is it, the senator from Connecticut. Mm-hmm. There are in the Democratic Party there are more and more younger people from all parts of the country. Interestingly, some from the upper Midwest. And the upper West, the Western Plains, that
well, they're part of the new world that I was talking about.
They're part of a new world, and they seem to be understanding that the mission of the party is to not be a little less Republican, but to be a little more Democratic, a little more FDR, a little less, you know, whatever.
I think we should talk about FDR.
Okay.
It's a little more FDR than Clinton, than Bill Clinton.
It's a lot more FDR.
That's what I'm saying. You don't say liberal anymore. I'm a liberal.
Well, Bill Clinton changed the Democratic Party to a corporate party.
They didn't want to be a liberal party anymore, right? They couldn't be called liberals.
That's part of it. Yes, that's part of it.
That was a big change, right?
Yes, it was a huge change.
And yet people think that he felt their pain.
Yeah, well, that's...
Isn't that interesting? I don't know.
I wasn't one of them, but the Clinton years were a big turning point, and we're still litigating it. I mean, that's what happened last year between Hillary and Bernie, and that's what happened in the general election. But again, it's yes, candidates have a philosophy, they have a personality, they project things, but they're running as part of a party, and so the party has got to make sure that its message is consistent. And the only consistent message that the Democratic Party can give that makes sense is that we are for the workers and we are for the security of workers. I call it income security. People can call it a lot of other different things.
What about the poor?
The poor work.
The poor aren't part of the unions, basically.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Well, they're beginning to. We're having more of it, right?
Well,
the fast food,
if a person,
the action of fast food, that's a very important thing.
And when they become part of the union, they make a better salary, they have better benefits, etc. It's a long path.
I mean, McGovern wanted to guarantee minimum income.
Yes, he did, but you know who first proposed that? Richard Nixon.
It's interesting.
Richard Nixon proposed the guaranteed national income as part of his welfare plan.
So why didn't it ever go?
because it has the sound of socialism, and socialism is a word, even though, you know, it's practically non-existent in the world, is a word that scares people.
Can capitalism, the way it's historically been, continue?
The way it's been, no. Am I a person who thinks that there should not be a capitalist system? No, I'm not against capitalism. But this idea that it's free enterprise is a joke. It's not free enterprise. It's the establishment works on behalf of the owners and the powerful, etc. If it was free, it would be a whole different thing.
Well, that's the Republicans with their deregulation, right?
Yes, but I don't believe that free enterprise is a misnomer. Everything when we got out of the Depression, when we had this growth, which brought more people into the middle class than ever before in the history of the world, we had regulation of businesses, we had regulation of work, we had regulation of a lot of different things. And so, you know, that's what we need. James Madison, regulation and control. There's nothing wrong with regulation and control. People can make money. It's okay if there's a bunch of billionaires. There's a lot of billionaires. I don't care. But what I care about is that does not take away from people having work, people making an income that gives them security, and people being able to raise a family and live a life that is a good and decent life. That's what the Democratic Party needs to be for.
And peace.
Oh, peace is a great thing. I was an anti-war activist in the 60s, so I'm in favor of peace.
And that's a heightened concern nowadays.
It is a heightened concern. Yes, we might as well get to it. We have a president who doesn't really understand how to deal with the world. I'm not saying doesn't understand how the world works. The world is very complicated. It changes, but he doesn't understand how to deal with it. Doesn't want to listen to people.
His personal diplomacy is so fascinating. Obviously, he thinks he can make change by flattery. This trip to the Far East, or with Russia, with South Korea, with Japan. I mean, it's all flattery.
Yeah.
With Philippines. Anyway, do you think that this new world we're beginning to see more candidacies and rejection of what's there, that we're going to see more of it next year, 2018?
I do think that.
We hope so, right?
Yes, but I think we have to be realistic. If you look at the statistics, it's still going to be difficult. We'll pick up seats. I believe that. Will we take over the Congress again? That might not happen because of a lot of things we're not going to get into now. But there are structural things having to do with redistricting and where those Republican votes are. Right. But will we make progress next year? Yes. The way to sustain that progress is to be consistent in terms of telling people, all people who work, no matter where they are in the country, no matter what ethnicity they are or anything, that the Democratic Party is for them, that there'll be no more of this 1990s
middle
stuff.
Of the ground. Eliminate the tension, really.
Yes,
right?
Yes, yes.
Between the wealthy and the working.
Well,
the donors, the wealthy donors. I mean, the wealthy donors have an undue proportion of power in the Democratic Party.
Well, the wealthy donors, have something to lose if this continues too. So they might want to keep that in mind. If they're in favor of other things the Democratic Party is in favor of, then they need to also be in favor of helping secure workers.
Right. And they have to listen to people. They've forgotten to listen to people.
The politicians, the party?
All politicians. Yes, they don't listen, right?
Not as much as they should.
Well, Vinny, we come to an end of another program. I don't know if we haven't solved anything. We've certainly been good at listing what the problems are. But we're also talking basically about that there is some progress, and we have great hope still. Don't we have hope?
I have hope for sure. I have hope for sure.
I do too. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. Appreciate it.
We at CUNY TV always like to hear from our viewers. So if you have any subjects you'd like to explore or people you'd like to hear, please let us know. Write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or go to our website, cuny.tv, and click on Contact Us. We look forward to hearing from you.